Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Principles of Dolby Atmos. This is our first in what I hope will be a series of webinars. Today we're going to talk about live mixing versus post-production, the differences between the two approaches as they relate to Dolby Atmos. Before we get there, though, let's talk about immersive audio and do some level setting. Let's make sure that we understand what immersive audio is. For live sports, Dolby Atmos is an immersive experience in that the audio is extended to the upper plane, to the ceiling, and you've probably no doubt heard of Atmos as having ceiling speakers or speakers and elements that come from above you. This configuration is called 5.1.4. Now 5.1 for everything that you are typically used to for surround sound, but also the .4 at the end that indicates 4 speakers in the overheads. Now, it's not limited to just 4 speakers. You can actually extend it to 916 and beyond for post-produced content, movies, cinema, and that sort of thing. But you don't have to tear up the house or break the bank to enjoy Atmos in your home. You can do it on using reflective speakers that actually bounce. They're intended and designed to bounce the sound off of the ceiling. They have up-firing elements that bounce the sound off the ceiling. You can also do it off a sound bar. Sound bars have the ability to also bounce sound off the ceiling, but there's also virtualizers that can do it in things like PCs and mobile phones and for headphones that give you a nice virtualized environment. And sound bars also can extend to with satellite speakers that are connected via Bluetooth, so you don't even need to deal with any wires. So there's a lot of ways you can enjoy Atmos. One of the main differences as we get into live and post-production mixing techniques is that they are different in the way they treat objects. You've no doubt heard that Atmos is an object-based technology, but there are limitations in the live domain, in the live world. An Atmos program in live has to be lighter than that which is done in the post world. It's what we call channel-based immersive. And channel-based immersive generally defined as the immersive mixing part of it happens mostly in the mixing desk. Whereas object-based immersive, there's additional metadata that describes the position of objects in time, and that travels along with the audio signal. The other thing is that object-based immersive generally lends itself to much larger size files and larger, as we call them, much larger pipes. Broadcast pipes are very small. You've got to get a very high quality signal through them to be enjoyed in the home, whereas the packaged media, whether it be via DVDs or VOD content, generally has, at least at some point, at some stage in its creation, has the ability to be much larger, mezzanine level, many hundreds of gigabytes in size, which just won't fit in a live environment. Plus, of course, as we know, live environments, you get one shot to do it. You don't get any do-overs. Whereas in post, you can try and again and do a bunch of different things depending upon the creative intent of that content. So moving forward with our guests today, we have 3 very distinguished guests. We have Geoffrey Low from Dolby Laboratories. Geoffrey is a content engineer at Dolby Laboratories. He's out of our Singapore office. Geoffrey has extensive experience mixing both music and other content for broadcast and packaged media. He's worked with a number of high-profile artists, and we're lucky to have him today. Glenn Stilwell extensive experience in sports mixing with his It's a Gas Productions. He also works with a number of networks mixing very high profile sporting events in both typical 5.1 and in Atmos. And we have Pat Schneider from Calrec, who is one of the West Coast support engineers, and he's going to help us understand what makes up a broadcast mixing desk, and talk about some of the features that Calrec has that's unique to Calrec. So welcome everybody. Glenn and Pat, let's start with you. So here's kind of like the path from the truck to the home. Tell us a little bit about this. Explain this to us, will you?
Well, thanks, Michael. The start of the creation of the signal is the content creator at the remote site. These are larger semi-tractor trailer rigs. They come in various sizes and shapes and colors and have all sorts of different equipment in them.
It's kind of like a TV station or a TV studio on wheels, right?
TV studio or TV control room on wheels with all the equipment to build a studio.
Now it shows that what happens in the truck then gets relayed somehow. We show a satellite link here, but it could be a fiber link, I suppose.
They connect up to the broadcast operations center, and the broadcast operations center then distributes that to the appropriate parties.
Right, and in the operations center, that's where, like, if I'm watching a football game, and they do a highlights package from a game that's occurring simultaneously, but somewhere else. That's kind of where that's added in, right?
Typically, that's where that's at. It could also be at various remote locations in today's world, but that's where it all comes in to the broadcast operations center, and then it gets parsed out to whatever work needs to be done with it, whether it needs to go right to transmission or it's being taped for later playback. And that's usually in our world, that's where the encoding takes place.
Right. And now it shows from the operations center, we got it's going to, in this diagram anyway, which again is simplified, goes to two places. It goes to local station, which appears to be just like over-the-air, rabbit ear kind of reception in the home. The other one goes to a program distributor, which I'm guessing is like a Comcast or a Cox cable or something like that.
Correct. That would be whoever you're paying your bill to.
Ah, okay. All right. So that's where my money goes.
That's where your money goes there.
Right. And that goes to a regional place where I guess that's when they have an opportunity to put more commercials in and stuff, huh?
In this world now, that's where they're inserting typically the local ad. Inside the remote truck, there is a person that's the assistant director or the associate director, the AD, who is talking to master control, which would be the broadcast operations center, and they're typically letting us know how many seconds to the break.
So
or
like
how
a
many
countdown.
seconds before we come back. Somebody at the operations center has to then cue the playlist that has the commercials in it.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think we're going to get into that a little bit deeper as we go on here. So let's save that thought for later. So this is a schematic of a broadcast truck, typical broadcast truck. This one actually is Game Creek Video. So take us through a few of these things. And Pat, if there's anything you can come in here with to give us a little bit of context as far as the audio side, please jump in.
Yeah, this looks like this is an A and a B unit. The A unit is the one with the production side. So
Right.
if you go from left to right, you can see how the truck is built out. Audio gets its own room because
Nice. That must be nice.
I mean, yes, it is nice. It has this particular truck has two positions in audio. There'll be in the European model, the second position is for the audio guarantee, but in the United States, there's probably a compound audio assistant or a audio comms person for a bigger show where the single audio person doesn't have to handle all the comms. In a normal, let's say a normal regional basketball game, there wouldn't be a comms person. There wouldn't be a compound A2. There would only be just the one A1 who is doing the comms and the mixing. So that person is responsible for the mix, the audio going to transmission, and all the comms.
This is the video wall, I guess, in the production side of things.
The big video wall is going to be your director, your producer. You can the TD. So the TD is next to the director, and then there's in this particular truck there's 3 more seats, which is probably the AD and the producer.
And the TD, you say that's the technical director? Is that
technical director, right? That he's the person who's sort of the equivalent of the audio guy. He's mixing the vision. So he's mixing all the video.
So he's sitting over by that, let me see if I can get it here, over here.
Yep.
And switching all of the cameras based upon, I guess, what the director is telling him to do, right?
He's switching the cameras, he's bringing in graphics, he's wiping to replays, he's building a 2-box for 2 cameras and picture in picture, if you want to refer to it that way. He's doing a lot of things over there at the direction of the director.
Generally, how many people, of course, everyone's talking about social distancing now, right? But generally, how many people do you have in a live broadcast? How many people are in a truck doing this stuff?
Depends on the size of the broadcast.
On a larger show, like a nationally televised event, an NBA game or a championship game or something like that.
Almost every seat will be full.
Every seat. So we're talking, I guess, maybe 25 people, something like that.
Could be that many, yeah.
So here's your office, and this is the Calrec work surface. This is the mixing desk. This is an Apollo.
It's an Apollo.
Yeah. So, Pat, what can you tell us about this thing? This is kind of like the source of. This is where pretty much every audio signal lands in a live broadcast, right?
That's correct. Yeah, you would have all kinds of sources, anything from your announcer microphones, any playouts, music. Basically, a lot of sources. Could be mono, could be stereo, could be 5.1. They all come on different faders, usually in some semblance of grouping, pretty much up to the A1 as to where he wants things to appear on the console. Since you mentioned it was an Apollo, just a quick thing about the Apollo versus the Artemis. You can see there's 2 sets of faders. There's a row of faders towards the armrest. There's another row of faders above that. That's basically totally independent from each other. They would be known as the A and the B layer. And then the Artemis and Apollo consoles have 12 layers. You basically have 12 layers of A and B times how many faders going across you have. So that's probably at least 64. Can't count that fast, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 56 fader to 60. Yeah, I think it is 64. So it's 128 faders at your fingertips times 12. So
oh my Goodness.
Generally, the things you're going to use the most would be on the top layer, so you don't have to go digging for them.
Right.
And every one of the sources coming in, you have complete control over gain, equalization, dynamics, and then, of course, routing, which is where it's going to go out either to, say, somebody's IFB. It's going to go to transmission. It might be getting an ISO of each microphone so they can, in remix situations, have complete control over something. Something got lost, didn't quite make it to air. They could go back and fix it later using those ISO tracks.
So
But that's the function
mentioned,
of the mixing console, kind of what it says.
you mentioned
Mixing the audio.
IFB. Tell us about IFB. What is that?
It's basically your Q mix, if you will. It's so at least you can hear the other people that you're carrying on a conversation with. You might have four announcers that are talking with each other, so they obviously have to be able to hear each other. Also gives you a clue when you're actually on the air. So I believe it stands for interruptible foldback. Is that right, Glenn?
Okay. Yep, interruptible foldback.
Yeah. Interruptible because the intercom also plays into that, so that a director or producer can talk to the talent either while they're on the air, telling them to hurry up, or at least giving them a cue that they're about ready to do something. So you would have different IFB mixes depending on if somebody wants to hear themselves or not. And then, of course, you have complete control over the level of each person in relation to others. I'm not sure how complicated they get in sports. I know in news it's pretty simple. A lot of times it's one IFB mix for everybody, and everybody just hears everything. So
right. Well, Glenn, can you answer that? How complicated is it in sports? It seems like we have...
Well, in the old analog days, we probably only made 2 IFB programs. We could have made 1 if we wanted to, and then as consoles became more sophisticated, you get a little bit of idle hands syndrome, and and you make individual programs for each announcer by themselves. So then we have the give me more me factor.
Right.
Because if you have an announcer that's been in the business for a long time, there's a high possibility that they've gone a little bit deaf, and they need to hear themselves louder. So you give them more of themselves than the other person.
So just looking at the surface here, it appears very, very complicated. And then, Pat, from what you were telling us regarding the number of inputs, the number of layers, the number of different things that the console can actually generate, the number of different sorts of signals, I guess, from the different elements, it's even way more complicated than it looks.
It can be. One way to look at it, even going back to the old analog days, a console could be scary if you've never sat in front of one before.
Yeah, that's true.
But it's really the same thing repeated all the way across. It's if you learn one fader and its associated controls, it's pretty much the same thing multiplied. It still goes deep, especially on these consoles compared to an old analog console, because of all of the EQ options, all of the filtering, all of the dynamics. And then you get into the routing, it gets very deep between aux ends, you've got direct outs, you've got group outs, you've got mains, you've got lots of options there.
So then I guess the complexity goes back towards what Glenn just said, is that the kind of like the idle hand syndrome, where you now that you are able to do something and you've done it, it becomes just the standard operating procedure, and have individual mixes for each individual person and on-air talent, maybe even individual mixes for the director, maybe. and giving everybody each individual element that they want. In addition to, let's not forget, mixing for the show that I'm getting in my home.
Yes, there are producers that need certain things a certain way, so not one size fits all.
This kind of gives us, I think, a little bit more of a detailed view of the sort of things that you're listening to in the audio suite within a truck. And Glenn, you can help me go through this, but the speakers or the letters in yellow are your production mix. This is what you're mixing for air. You have left, center, right in the front. You've got left surround, right surround, and a sub. So that's your 5-1. And then you have 4 speakers overhead. So that's when you're mixing an Atmos show, that's what you're mixing to go to air. That
Correct.
includes everything that I would hear in the home.
Correct.
But there's a bunch of other stuff that while you're mixing, you're just being bombarded with things like you got to listen to the director and the producer and cues, and if they say, okay, music, roll, ready red, roll red, or whatever sort of things that you're listening to, that's all kind of coming at you at the same time. So what's amazing to me is that you are able to create the product that I experience and enjoy at home in this great, immersive format that feels in some cases like I'm there in the stadium, while all of this other stuff, which is transparent to me, invisible to me, is still going on.
Yep. This is a photo from Doug Deems, who does Notre Dame football in Atmos, and he looks like he has his room pretty much set up very similar to every other mixer in the world, where the director and the producer are coming from spatially different locations than where his program is coming from. So, and he's listening for key words from either the producer or the director to know what's coming next. He's also listening to the program, but I doubt he could tell you what the score was, because he's not really concerned with the actual content. It doesn't. The words to him don't matter, but it matters that they sound like words, or it sounds like a football kickoff. It sounds like fans, and then he has all the things that are, ancillary to that, which is the director and the producer, which are giving them the cues. He has assistants in the field that might be calling him on a communications panel to tell him that something's wrong, or they fixed something, or do they need something? The AD he has to listen to counting into and out of the breaks, so he knows when he's on the air and when he's off the air. And then the tape people, which he probably communicates with to let them know that something's coming, or they're going to let him know when something's ready, or he's going to clear them when he's done with playing whatever they were playing back. And then the talent's talk back. So you listen to that, because if the talent wants, give me more me during the middle of the game, he's probably going to tell everyone on the talk back that he needs more me.
And that's your job.
And that's my job. And then he's probably listening to might be listening to a sideline reporter.
It's just amazing that you can kind of make sense of everything in this environment where you have just multiple sound sources. The most critical one associated with the picture, but all the other ones that are associated with just direction.
One of the things that we ask students, or when we talk to students, and these aren't my words, these are heard these several times, but we can teach you how to build a show on the desk. We can teach you how to mix that. We can actually teach you how to mix the show. We can teach you technically how every piece of equipment works. We have a hard time. We can't teach you how to listen.
Right.
You kind of have to learn that, through experience, and you have to have a knack for it.
Yeah. Incredible. So let's get into the actual live workflow, the nuts and bolts of the live workflow. So here's kind of just a very high-level view of things. On the left-hand side, we have signals that are going into the mixing desk, stuff that Glenn, you have control over, the audio replays, the music, the video replays, everything that generates sound coming into that mixer. And then from there, you're monitoring in addition to all the stuff we talked about, all the distractions from your producers, directors, cues, talent, etc. Then you're monitoring in the program in 514 with the 4 overheads. And then from there, that monitoring is controlled by the DP590, in this example anyway, which is the Atmos authoring tool, which does things like allows you to listen to that immersive experience, that immersive program, that 514 program that you're mixing, and allows you to listen to it also in 5.1. You can see how somebody who didn't have Atmos at home but was receiving the same signal could hear it, or even in stereo. Ultimately, that would go to an Atmos encoder and then get transmitted back to the broadcast operations center.
Those items, the 591, 580, those could actually all be in the broadcast operations center. Mm-hmm. And the only thing, if I use the monitoring in the desk itself, then all I'm doing is all I have to do is send 10 channels of audio.
Right.
The 5.1, that's all. Once it leaves my desk, then the presentation, all the metadata is created beyond me.
So then that's actually a good segue. So Pat, the 590 capability for monitoring, what sort of functionality is built into the desk that can do that?
The desk can be configured to be usable in an Atmos environment, and that's basically by using 2 main outputs. In a normal 5.1 show, you have a 5.1 main out, feeds transmission. You have all the panning and all your individual mics. You can arrange that sound field however you want. To do an Atmos broadcast, you need an additional 5.1 main, and you're only really using 4 channels of the 6 channels that the 5.1 main would provide.
Oh, okay, I see.
And it's basically going to be the left and right front and the left and right rear. And if you just look up, you put that on the ceiling, and that becomes your front stereo and your rear stereo mics for the overheads. So the newer line of consoles that are sort of been showed, I think, for the last 2 years now, maybe at NAB, is the Impulse, and that will have native 5.1, 5.12, 5.14, 7.1, 7.12, and 7.14 input channels, groups, and main outs. So it'll be a lot easier in the newer console, but it can be done, as Glenn can attest, on a Artemis and an Apollo, including the monitoring as well. The console itself actually can generate the down mixes. It always has been, even back to the old Calrecs. They've always had on a 5.1 out, you've had a stereo down mix and you have a mono down mix of the stereo. So you would also get a similar thing, not quite right out of the box, but can be configured by basically building a small mixer within the mixer, if you will, to handle the down mix of a Atmos to give you a 5.1 equivalent to that.
That's great. So let's take a look at the first example, which was using the 590. Folks who are watching, I encourage you to go to the website on the screen for some online tutorials and some other information regarding Atmos. There's a QR code there, so you can go ahead and just take a picture of that or put your phone to it, and it'll take you right to the website. Let me share another screen here, and we can see the DP590 in action. So here I'm looping some content into the DP590, and we kind of have, this is the user interface for the DP590. You can see that there are a number of kind of almost like input strips, I guess you could call them, similar to what you might have seen on the Calrec mixing desk. One of these is 5.1s. You see these 5 blue dots here. And then each one of these are your overheads. This is left front, this is right front, this is left rear, and this is right rear. And when I select them, I can make some changes. And I can actually, if I wanted to, I could go here and grab this button here, this blue ball here, and move it. And say, okay, I want this to go in the center. And now the sound coming in on that channel, wherever that input is assigned to this input strip, now is played out through the overhead, all 4 overheads equally. And you can see how some of that is changing in our output, I would hope anyway. Actually, there's nothing coming in on that channel right now, sorry. But this is how things can work. If I go ahead and assign it to another channel, let's actually assign it to, looks like 13 has got some stuff going on. So let's go to 13 and assign it there. And now if we go here, you can see that if I move it, things are moving up there in the meters, up in this area here. So you can see that the actual signal is moving to different overhead channels. And that's the basic functionality of in monitoring for the DP590. You could also listen to it you could also listen to your mix in 5.1. You could listen to it in stereo or full-blown immersive audio. So this has been a critical building block for creating Atmos content for live programming. The mixing desk is a very powerful piece of equipment, and the newer versions of the Calrec have all of this stuff kind of built into it. Pat, can you take us through some of this drawing here?
Yeah, this would be a typical Artemis channel path, and actually Apollo is very similar. You just get more, but the basics are all the same. So you start at the upper left where it says channel input. Mm-hmm. That's going to be your source, whether it be a microphone or an EVS or music or whatever it happens to be. You've got basically why it says pre-EQ, then EQ, and then pre-fade, and then post-fade. Those are all various pick-off points, if you will, where I can, if I wanted to take a signal before the equalizer and send it maybe to one of these outputs, whether it be an aux end or a direct out, I might want to have another signal that's after the EQ doing the same thing. Maybe it's going to an ISO record somewhere. And then you have the fader in the path next, and then you've got post-fader, which is basically another pick-off point that can be sent out. So you have all these options when you get ready to send things, whether it's a direct out, a track bus, an aux bus, a main, any of the type of outputs, even group outputs. And basically a lot of the busing is really just destinations or groupings of things. final destination really would be program to air. You might want to have a mix of the announcer mics that could be on a group, and then you could record that group separately. Or I could have that group master fader just so I could take all the announcers up or down in level with one fader. It gets a lot more deep than that. You can get into VCAs and all kinds of things, but for the basic general signal flow here, this is really just showing you that you've got quite a bit of flexibility in terms of what can feed an aux end and what can feed direct outs, tracks, and auxes.
So
hopefully that
then to kind of it actually seems, other than the typical stuff that we associate with mixers as EQ and dynamics and things like this, it seems like it's just a giant audio router, I guess, right?
In a sense, that's correct. Yeah, you're able to move a lot of things around within the console as well. And basically the inputs and the outputs really could be thought of as a router.
Mm-hmm.
There's even a few instances where router panels can control the routing of the console, basically turning the console into an audio router without actually putting signal on a fader. It's a very, very flexible system.
Yeah, it seems like it. And the newer Calrec products, the Impulse, as you were saying, that adds more output buses or input buses, or just adds more buses, period?
All of the above. Yeah.
Really?
And even the Apollo is pretty powerful. I think it's 1,020 input channels, if you will. If you were to do all monos, you start having that for stereos, or you did 5x6 for 5.1s. But yeah, there's a lot of flexibility. And that's really the difference between the Artemis and the Apollo. There's 4 different versions of Artemis, and then there's the Apollo, would be the flagship. But the basic difference between that is input channel count, anywhere from 240 up to 1,020. So, and you get a few more tracks and auxes as you go bigger as well. But there's quite a few trucks actually with Artemis lights, which is the smallest of the Artemis line.
Has anybody ever run out of them?
Possibly on a light, but I don't think you would from a beam, a shine, a ray, and certainly not on an Apollo.
Right. Yeah,
Apollos get used a lot in entertainment because they need all those inputs and outputs.
You'd probably run out of money for microphones before you'd run out of processing power. On the new Calrec Impulse Core, is that going to support immersive inputs on single faders?
Yes. Yeah, you'll have mono, stereo, 5.1, 5.1.2, 5.1.4, 7.1, 7.1.2, and 7.1.4 input channels, groups, and mains. Yeah, it's pretty powerful.
So in that case,
so many channels in a fader, you won't be able to see the meter.
Yeah,
the lines on the meter will be so small.
You'd end up.
Well, it actually has metering to match too, so you'll have 7.1.4 metering on those inputs as well.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's going to be crazy.
Keeping track of that is going to definitely task the brain. So in an immersive mix, for an immersive live mix, you kind of need to decide, I guess, what you're going to put in the overheads, Glenn. So how do you make that decision?
Well, it's time, money, and resources, I guess. But in reality, the Atmos mix, that immersive mix, really opens up the room by putting sound above you, just like it does in the movies. It does the same thing in live events or live sports, more specifically. So, at the core, I imagine myself sitting at the 50-yard line, halfway up in the stands, and sound is, if I'm there as a fan, sound is coming from all around me, and it's coming from above me, from just the crowd that's above me in the upper bowl, or the people sitting behind me is what comes from my left surround and my right surround. So something as simple as putting out 4 extra microphones in, let's say, if we could, 4 corners of a stadium to represent what you hear from above is the simplest way to think of making an Atmos mix. Once you're done with that, then you can, when you have idle hands, you can start to play around, and you'll find other things that should come from above. Things like the PA announcer is one thing that a lot of people are doing now.
Right. Yeah.
Or even now graphics. They're starting to make graphics and introductions and packages that are going to be mixed in Atmos, so that the sound of a bug is flying above your head as it flies above your head, right, in the video portion. So
very cool. You have some photos here of some kind of ambient crowd mics. Now these are the Sennheiser Ambio mics. These are multi-capsule microphones, right?
Yeah, those are the Sennheiser Ambios, and these pretty much we try and place them as near to the crowd, but not too close. They're trying not to get too much of the band per se, but they really want the crowd sound.
Right.
There's sometimes you're going to take your even mono microphones you could take and point directly skyward. So in a dome, you're essentially getting the sound that's being reflected off the roof.
Right. And this one is a single point microphone that is just focused on pointing at the crowd.
Yep. From above.
Right.
So if you really think about it, this particular microphone is collecting the sound that you would place in, let's say, the left front overhead.
Mm-hmm.
So you can in a current Calrec Artemis, you can pan that to the appropriate channel for transmission that is the left front overhead.
Mm-hmm. It's very cool. Well, thank you guys. Stick around for a little bit, and we will continue with a roundtable. I'd like to get to Geoffrey, who will help us understand the post-production workflow for Dolby Atmos as we go forward. So, Geoffrey, this is a much different environment than what we'd see in the sports truck. I wonder if you could tell us where are the speakers for the people who are yelling at you because you missed a cue?
Hi, Mike. Yep. This is like a post-production studio, and
right.
There's no speaker of the person yelling at you. He's just sitting behind you, so he's just talking to you from the back.
So you have a real person there physically who can tap you on the shoulder and say, "No, I don't like how you did that."
Yeah, and he will sit with you for long hours, and we will go through the scenes one by one, and every minute throughout the whole content to tweak little things, move little things up and down to get a perfect balance of the audio elements and the experience before we actually send it out. So as you can see here, everything this whole place looks quiet. The pictures you have shown earlier, they look like there's so many things all around you, and you have to manage so many things. In a post environment, the things you really have to manage is usually inside the program, where you see where you see the computer and the screen, and they have, there's a lot of depth in the program, there's a lot of features in the program, and we work through that rather than, it usually looks like a cleaner space, a quieter space, I would say. The speakers are still the same. You can see the height speakers and stuff like this, but usually we'll work alongside someone, and we will run through the scenes to get the content right.
Right. So the main, one of the critical differences, of course, is channel-based versus object-based, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the other main difference, I think, to point out is that, and it's probably obvious to everyone right now, is that in live you get one chance to do it right. Here is where you can actually concentrate on the content.
Yeah, and exactly what you're saying is very true. And we go it from start to end, or we will just loop a particular minute to get it right. Especially if there was a very dense scene, like a fighting scene, or many elements in the scene. We will really that can take even a day sometimes just to get it right. But one important thing I like to add to what you've just mentioned is that like what Glenn does, it is unscripted.
Right.
You can practice all you want before a sports game. I think Glenn would attest to this, but nobody knows what happens in a sports game, or because it's unscripted, right? We just get ready and then we go ahead. But with the post studio, everything is scripted. It's scripted right to the second or to the frame, and we control every change we want to change, just to get that full impact of the content experience and stuff like this.
Right.
So the unscripted part is a one very big difference, because nothing can really prepare you for it. Whereas in a post-production world, we are trying to get the best impact in the shortest time, and get the most details, to give like so-called a spectacular experience, so that people can watch the same content again and again and again, and and still be delighted about all the little details that's going on.
Right. Yeah, it's a different. I guess it's a different sort of skill set. I've worked with a lot of sports mixers who they wouldn't know where to begin for mixing scripted content, and of course, vice versa is also true, because it's just such a chaotic environment in sports. It's just unbelievable that they're able to actually produce something that I listen to at home, and I'm thinking, wow, this sounds really great. It's just crazy that way.
Yeah, and one of the hardest thing is like in this like I mentioned earlier, in the studios, right? If you look at a picture now, it just looks quiet. Like that this
Right.
studio is soundproofed, and when you go in there, there's a really nice surreal. There's solace, and until you start the work and stuff, it's all very controlled environment. You can pick up the phone and call for food and stuff. Can go to the the restroom anytime you like. But in the truck, it's chaos, right? I mean, like what you mentioned is
Right.
chaos. It's not only chaos. In this studio environment, we listen to it in so much detail. We really stick our ears to the speakers and stuff. But in Glenn's world, when they're doing a game, there's no way. I mean, he has to listen to like the directors trying to talk at the same time, trying to balance his mix and to make sure that the mix is right. So like what he mentioned about, they don't hear what they are saying, but they have to make sure that it sounds like a voice, it sounds like a message that's going through. So there's so much to listen, and then after that, you got to listen for like technical problems that will happen. I mean, and they got to save it, and if there was something that was going to go wrong, they got to prevent it and stuff like that. So it's quite a lot of management. Whereas in the post studio, we are just in our little own world, and we're just trying to create a content that will bring people into this world for the duration of the content. So yeah, it's very quiet, and the only person speaking is really the producer or the director, who's just telling you that, for this particular scene, you just bring that down a little bit. And the changes could be very minute, like maybe 1 decibels, which is most people can hardly hear it, or they can hardly hear that in like a living room environment. But in a studio like this, that 1 decibels can make huge difference, stuff like that. So yeah, by contrast, there's quite a lot of difference, really.
Yeah, and this particular picture is from a film dub stage, and I think what's interesting here is that mixing a larger a larger scale, big budget motion picture is kind of a team effort, isn't it?
Yeah. So if you look at the console part of the picture where you see the console stretches really long, that's a very interesting thing because you look at about 3 seats and in a large format kind of motion picture kind of thing, they can kind of divide the main three elements. So you have dialogue, you have sound effects, and you have music. So there'll be like 3 sub mixers trying to balance the music, the dialogue, and the sound effects, and then they will sum it up to one mixer or one computer that would actually take up the whole mix. That's like the recorder kind of thing, and you'll take up the whole mix. So the details go so far as breaking up into different elements in the whole soundtrack, like the music stuff and the dialogue stuff and the sound effect stuff. Whereas like Glenn, he's doing all these 3 with a pair of hands.
Yeah, he's doing it all by himself. But here
Yes.
is like but it also takes for scripted content. Episodic television is actually relatively quick, I think, right? It's like you have the audio team might have a few days to put together a mix for a particular TV show, but a film that could take months to mix it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, usually it takes a month at least, if you're talking about building the sound from ground up, and then, the mixing part will be the easiest. It's like, because we are putting in sources from all over the place. So, when they set out to do a content, a movie or something, then they'll get somebody to write the music. They'll also get somebody to do Foley and sound effects, layer the sound effects together. And then there'll be somebody looking after dialogue. So some dialogue comes from the shooting from location, and some dialogue that maybe didn't work out at the location had to be redubbed. So it's all divided into parallel kind of steps and processes, and then finally we'll come to this big studio like you see in this picture, and then we put music together, we put sound effects together, and we put the dialogue together, and then we try to build the whole experience for the whole content. And there'll be the producer, director, and there'll be this guy called the re-recording mixer, who start to balance all this out. Instead, you tell the music guy, okay, music, can you just bring this out a little bit? And the director said, yeah, we want the impact of the explosion in this scene or something. So there's lots of tiny little balancing to do, and we do this balancing again and again and again. So, if you're building sound from scratch, it will take months, and not only months, it's parallel with different staff. So, there are music people who deal with various music, going to another studio to score the strings, score the orchestra and stuff like that. And then you got another bunch of people that will be in a Foley studios, with all kind of utensils and stuff, creating sound effects, shoes, different sort of surfaces so they can create different footsteps. And then you have a bunch of people in editing suites who are trying to clean up audio for the dialogue and putting them together, trying to stitch everything together, making it sure that everything conforms to picture and stuff like this. So yeah, and that's apart from the picture, which is a whole separate topic together, where they actually have to edit the picture together, edit the takes together. So yeah, that's a lot of work and takes a lot of time.
Yeah. So you mentioned music a lot, and I know that there's the new thing in the music industry is immersive music in an immersive format. And I imagine it would take place in a studio something like this. A smaller scale mixing surface, but the same techniques apply to music, or do they?
Yeah, pretty much to music. The only difference with the music is we don't kind of lock it to picture. So if you look at the two studio pictures, you have a big screen, and obviously the bigger studio, the screen is also a very dominant part of the picture, or the dominant part of the studio. So the only difference in music is we kind of don't lock it to picture. When we have to do sound that locks to picture, even in Glenn's situation, locking to picture and making sure that the sound relates to the picture that the consumer is looking at. There are some rules to that. There are some practices to that you kind of have to do, because of course there's creativity, but obviously if it becomes too detached and then people, it does not connect, and then that will be a problem. With music, we are totally focused on audio itself. And we the interesting about the Dolby Atmos music is that we are giving people a new way of listening to the same songs again. There's a whole different kind of experience to the music point of it, in a sense that music has been traditional stereo all this time, and I used to do music whereby I'll be mixing stereo as if the band was in front of me, and so you have the guitarist on the left, some other music instrument, the keyboards on the right and stuff like that, and the vocals in the center. So it's always a front kind of staging. With Dolby Atmos, we can go into a little bit more intimacy with the music, in the sense that, we can be like standing on the stage, listening to the band play. So we can actually bring things around you, bring the instruments around you. And that gives a whole different outlook, a whole different sort of opinion to the music. And for me, it's the intimacy sort of something I'm kind of attracted to. Is a different way. It's like, listening to the same band, but you're not as an audience, but you're standing on stage with the band, kind of that kind of scenario. So that's very interesting for a moment. But in production wise, pretty much the same. It's a post-produced environment.
One of the things that I've noticed about listening to Dolby Atmos music is that there's a tangible sense of space that you don't get with stereo. Kind of a more intimate experience and a more emotional experience as well.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the biggest limitations in stereo we have had, for the past year since music was produced that way, was that, music's, if you listen to a piece of music, it always starts, there's always some graduality to it. It will start slow, like soft as you build the story. It goes to the first chorus, and then after that, you will just blow up to the final chorus because you want this big ending. And with traditional stereo, the problems we used to have was that we have to start squeezing the big parts into the headroom of stereo.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and that was tough because that's all the room you have to play with, and you have to squeeze all this stuff back. So you would just use the loudest part to max out the headroom, and then bring everything lower. And that was one of the limitations that we had, and people got very good doing that. I mean, I think in the US there were really amazing engineers that can manage this headroom. It sounds big and loud and stuff, but it's still stereo. But with Atmos, what happened is, like you say, we can bring all the instruments around you instead, give them more space, and as the music grows and be bigger, there is so much more space you can do it. And the brilliant part is that the Dolby, the decoding, and there's some limiting and stuff like this, actually controls all that so that it will still work out in a stereo, like a stereo down mix and stuff like this. We have also a binaural render that can also create the space in headphones and stuff like this. So yeah, it's very interesting for music that, you can take something that have been heard so much in stereo and then start to give it a whole different emotional level, a whole different intimacy level all over again, just because we have Dolby Atmos.
Right. So let's get into that and look at some of the production workflow that the tools that are used to create Dolby Atmos in post, whether it be music or for episodic and scripted content. So take us through this. This is very interesting.
Sure. So I think the thing about Dolby Atmos is that the main thing here, is the renderer. That's like the secret sauce and stuff, and that's what glues everything together. We call it a renderer, whereby we will send these objects and bed to the renderer, and the renderer will create this three-dimensional sound field mix for us, and this is kind of how we do it. So in a traditional kind of post-production environment, you have all the elements like dialogue, ambience and room tone, and then sound effects and music score, like I mentioned earlier. And it goes to the DAW. The DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation, and it's just like an audio console. You can have an audio console, but the function is pretty much the same. You will sum all the audio tracks together. It will be a place where all the audio tracks will be collected together to create the Atmos mix or the Atmos master, which is going to bring that immersive experience. So with with the post-production environment, we use like a hybrid kind of approach, like we use multiple buses and hybrid kind of approach. So to create the whole Atmos sound field, what we do is we have a bed. A bed is like traditional channel-based stuff, which is channel-based busing and stuff, so that we can put static elements in to create this like a bedding sound field. So if you imagine a scene of a forest, the bed would be, the rustling of the leaves, some wind, some rust, twigs and stuff like this. And then after which, then we add the objects. The objects are the highlights of the thing, maybe the lead or the movement of the stuff. So for example, if there was a bird flying across, then the sound of the bird will be set as an object, and then from there we will store three-dimensional kind of coordinates to the objects, and then we can move the object across this 3D space. So if you look at the renderer, there is a box, and the box is our imaginary space, because we don't kind of look at things in channels anymore. We look at it as a three-dimensional space, and then we can say, oh, it flies from the left to the right and over your head, and we can actually record that movement. We can take the sound, move it across the space, and then we record that movement, and then we can tweak that movement, how fast we want it, how big we want it, and where does it land, at a specific point in time, so that it's totally synced with the picture and stuff like this. So in the post world, we have more features to play with, or to kind of explain that, like in the sense that we have a bed to set up, so sort of like a staging of the whole sound field first, and then we have all objects, which are the highlights, and then we have a total of about 128 tracks going to the renderer. The renderer will create the sound field and then push it out to whatever formats you have. So for example, we do a monitoring, which is at 714, so that's your kind of channel width, the 714. It can create any kind of the mix, that full Atmos mix, or like a 514, a stereo, mono, you can do that, and we can print that in WAV files so that it outputs to any formats that is required. But mainly, the renderer will also record the master file. So you can see it's DAMF. DAMF stands for Dolby Atmos Master File Set, and this is the master file that we store. And this master file is kind of in object-based with the bed. And then anytime it's required for any different formats, for now or somewhere in the future, okay, we can do it. So for example, if somebody wants a 714 master now, we will say, okay, load up DAMF, print the re-renders to 714, and then output it, and then deliver it. And then if, let's say 2 years later, and then, some brand comes out with, for example, 912, and 912 is very popular. Everybody, has a 912 set up, a soundbar, and the content studio says, hey, we want a 912. We can go back to this master file, and then we can print the 912 and give it to them, and they're like, oh, that's great. And if you and the same with the live production, what we do is we send our Dolby Digital Plus Atmos to any device, and the device would be able to play back, optimize the experience to whatever soundbar formats you have, or whatever home theater. So if it was a 5.1, it will optimize this whole Atmos experience for 5.1, and it all does this automatically when we, based on the Dolby technology to play back in the different living room environment.
So backing up a little bit, your example of the forest. So if I'm sitting I'm at a movie, I'm sitting in a movie, everything's dark, the scene of a forest comes in, and there's that, like you say, that bird element, the flapping wings, the chirping, the different sounds that make up that bird element. And from my perspective in the theater, I hear that going over my head and going from left to right or front to back or however they do it. This is how it's done. This is how the mixers do it. They take that element and move it in real time, and they capture that movement, right?
Yep, that's right. We can we have like joysticks and knobs to do that if we want to, and we would do that with moving joysticks and knobs and stuff. We can do that live, so-called live, and then or we can just go into the parameters and start typing in the values or drawing lines and stuff like that, and then we combine all these things together, and all this happens in the three-dimensional panel. So you see that little dot. So you see a little dot in the panel, and that's the dot we're gonna move. And there are a bunch of numbers, X, Y, Z coordinates and stuff like this in there. And then we these three coordinates will change as we do the rainbow effect. That's kind of what I call it. So it's something that goes over your head. So we can either key in the numbers, draw lines, or use a bunch of I would call it a joystick or some knobs, and we turn that in real time, and then we can do that pretty easily. Yeah.
So, but that's kind of like a big difference between live and post, in that in live, in order to do that, which you can do that in live, but you'd have to actually do it with that signal, whereas in post, you make that movement, but that movement is actually controlling metadata. The three-dimensional location of that and that the renderer then takes that information to actually put it where it needs to be and move it to where it needs to be. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you can put it this way, and most of it boils down to what we talked about earlier about being scripted and unscripted. So we know this exactly how the bird is gonna fly from point A to point B, and where is it going to land in that forest, and exactly to the frame, or the picture, the sound will just stop. Whereas in the unscripted environment, you are just waiting for the bird to really take off, and then your hands has to trigger something to create this whole rainbow effect. Yeah, so that it kind of boils down to whether it's scripted or unscripted, because we in a post-roll we kind of know, or we manipulate that to happen. So we know that there's a very important significance in the storytelling that the bird must fly across now, because that's the story and that's the end of the story, or I don't know, that's a moral of the story, I don't know. But yeah, so we manipulate that, and it's really right down to the second or right down to the frame.
Mm-hmm. So you have a demonstration to show us here. So I'm going to let you share your screen.
Yep, let me do this. Yeah, so like I mentioned in the last slide, the main thing in Atmos in post is the renderer. So you have normal DAW, which is the workstation, the digital audio workstation, and then sends out all the audio and the positional metadata into the renderer. The renderer kind of puts all these things together, and this is the renderer also creates the master file. So I've loaded a master file. It's just a 1-minute master file for demonstration, and all I have to, and if I want to listen to the Atmos experience, all I have to do press play, and I get this master file. And you can see these little dots here are all the objects. I've created an object that's flying around. So this is like the bird that's flying around the viewer, and you see that normal like human head. We can always choose to see it, in a form of a theater, how it would be moving in a theater, and we can always see it as a person kind of perspective. And we have the monitoring here, just like the 590 that was shown just now. This is now set at 714 monitoring. So it's getting all the audio, it's getting all the positional metadata from the digital audio workstation, and then it's creating the Atmos sound field as we are talking, and it's creating the master file. So if it has to create to a 714, like I mentioned earlier, it will create a 714. Should we say, let's, in the post-roll, we got to sort of check whether the mixers translate. So let's listen to it in 5.1 and hear how the Atmos renderer is going to optimize this sound field that we created in a 5.1 environment. So this, we can listen to it in a 5.1 mix. And then, then again, let's say, okay, let's go for the lowest common denominator, which is stereo, and then we can hear it in stereo. And what we hear in this renderer will be what the consumer is gonna hear when they are listening to it in the living room. So this is where we check for mixed translation and stuff like this. And yep, and it's any other formats that we want, is up to us to set up the renderer to do it. And if you can see all the balls going up and down, those little balls are the objects. And if just notice the rear of the boxes as I start playing the master. And you see the rear, you see the size as it grow up. So, in Atmos, we can even control the size of the object, where, we make it from a small dot and then it just blows up, So this, for storytelling, this is a very useful tool, and this is really amazing. And other than moving, the objects around, obviously we can place the object statically. We can move it anytime we want. So, like I mentioned earlier, it is always moving. It is always planned, and we rehearse it. And after rehearse it, we record it. And after we record it, we even continue to refine it. Like, maybe when we did it live, it was that 30 milliseconds or 50 milliseconds or one frame too late. We can still change, and move that 50 milliseconds if we wanted that. And yep, so this is pretty much the main thing. And then after that, you can see I've loaded the file, and this is the file, and we store this file. And anytime we would like, like somebody says, can you give me a wave file in 5.1, because I need it in a 5.1 version of the master. So this master is what we call like a mezzanine master in Post, and we keep that for future proofing of the content. And we can always render it in 5.1. And then we can click export, and you will export a set of 5.1 waves for, a particular kind of format. Like sometimes, we need it for so-called like stereo or binaural. We can print the stereo and then send it out. So we can keep this, right up to some, maybe in even 2 years time or 5 years time, maybe everybody wants 912. We can obviously go to something like 912, or this is 512. I have 916 set up for listening and monitoring. I can export a 916 sort of channel-based version of it and send it out if needed. So this is the amazing part of Atmos, where not only you get the 3-dimensional sound field, and because we work in objects, we can future-proof the content to any channel-based formats.
That's amazing. These tools are significantly deeper than the tools that are available or even necessary for live. Because as we've always been saying here for the last hour or more, is that live, you get one shot. It's not scripted. You kind of have to go with how things happen. Whereas with Post, you have that luxury of time. Now you have these are the tools for the main production tools, or at least the groups of tools for post-production for Atmos, right?
Yep, and I'm always trying to get people excited about Atmos and trying to get them to produce some content. So I created this, 3 main component list, where I like to share that, okay, if after watching this, you are really interested in Atmos, you want to find out more, and in fact, you not only want to find out more, you want to try making some Atmos content, and like for maybe even for music, which is not difficult to do. So basically, if you want to start there and you want to start jumping and you want to hit the ground running, the 3 things that you kind of need will be, like I said, the first most important thing is the renderer. This is what has changed from traditional post-production. We added a renderer to the process, and DAW, that's standard, Pro Tools, Nuendo, and all these very popular DAWs support, we can work, the renderer can work with these DAWs to create the content. And last but not least, some form of a monitoring setup. We recommend something like a 714 for sort of like content with picture, but with music, maybe 514 is enough, or maybe 512 is enough. But for kind of picturing, stuff with picture and video, usually we just recommend 714. But any form of monitoring where you can hear some heights, some surrounds, that'll be good enough. And if you have these three components, you're probably 70-80% ready to go. Maybe some details you need for setting it up and running the lines through and sort of understanding the concept of how to print the master and stuff like this. But it all boils down to these three elements.
That's amazing. Thank you, Jeff.
Most welcome.
Yeah. So I'd like to get Glenn and Patrick back in so we could have a little bit of a roundtable. Guys, who's got the harder job, do you think? The live mixer or the post mixer? What do you think?
It's a tough job, man.
They're both tough jobs. We're both on deadline. When you're on deadline, he can drag his out for as long as he needs to.
I don't know that that's true. That's true. But
as there's a common phrase, the puck drops at 7. The game is not going to wait for me. If audio's not ready, the game's not going to wait. The puck will drop at 7 o'clock. And the kickoff is going to happen. The tip-off is going to happen. You can't wait for me.
I think that one of the things, sorry, Jeff, but I think one of the things that is unique on the post side is, whether it be scripted content or for music, is the heightened level of scrutiny that you're under. Because since you do have time to get things perfect, then the pressure's on to actually do that and to translate some subjective description of what a director wants into actions that result in some some product that they're happy with.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for saying that, Mike. Yes, I'm trying very hard not to use the word excused, but there's no excuse at all, because when the director or the producer in the studio says, okay, do this, you have to do this, this is what I want, I get this for me, and you look at him and you say, no, I can't do it, then we're always under this pressure that there's somebody at the door queuing up, and he's waiting to take your seat any day, because everybody wants to sit in that nice plush studio, hang out with so-called content creators, directors and stuff like. I mean, it's kind of fun to hang out with these people, but the pressure is there all the time. And to what Glenn just said, there is also a timing crunch in a certain way. Not that the ball will start at 7 or the kickoff is at 7, but one of the biggest frustrations, especially with audio, is that there is a release date for the film or for the content. We have by contract or something, everything has to be done ready to go out to the masses by this date, because some marketing team has planned out this great launch party and everybody is gone there. It's going to be so, highly anticipated, have driven this, just like the finals game, right? Everybody is so eager to watch this final. So on that day, 7 p.m. in a cinema somewhere or on the TV somewhere, it has to play this content. So what had happened is, it doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen sometimes, is that they have a year or 6 months to build this content, right? And they tell audio that, okay, at this date, I'm going to give you the audio, the video will be done so that you can start building the audio. Obviously, we'll get some edits first to try to save time and do something, but they'll be say, okay, the release is in September, June, we'll give you the audio and you can start working on it. Comes June, there was rain the other day, we couldn't shoot this, the recording, screwed up, we had to redo a lot of scenes and a lot of recoordination, everybody's in panic mode, we can't give you the audio in June. But, then they'll give you the audio in July, and that killed 1 month of time, and you're sitting around doing nothing, and then suddenly you have July, and then But they're not going to say, oh, because of that, we're going to move the release date a month back.
Oh,
It's
right.
still going to be September. And so everybody plays with this rubber band kind of time. Say, it's okay. We'll just give audio a week late. It's not going to affect them. And we're like, no, it's going to affect us because it's going to affect how much time we got to do this. And, like being in a studio, we kind of have this luxury of time, as you said, but the time is also being compressed because some not so nice thing happen, some mishap or some accidents, I don't know. So there's always some delay, and it always is crunch, and they always think, audio people expendable, don't worry, they'll make it. And then suddenly you are, what becomes 3 months will become 2 months, become 1 month, and they expect the same result because it is like what you said, the amount of quality has to be there. If you can't do it, there's somebody out the door that will want to come in and take your space anytime.
Right. So the tools that you guys use, clearly it seems pretty obvious that the post-production tools for Atmos, specifically for Atmos, are much more feature rich, much deeper, a lot more capabilities than there are on the live side. Where on the live side, we're mostly relying upon the functionality of the mixing desk and how the busing structure, if there is, for monitoring and for panning and this sort of stuff, if there's any sort of panning, which isn't really sort of a popular thing, at least active panning, moving things. So for Pat, I wonder if you could maybe articulate what the differences are between, say, the Calrec broadcast mixing desk and, say, something that is more attuned towards scripted content,
I would say the biggest difference probably is the amount of outputs and flexibility. So aux ends, tracks, because you're sending a lot of signals many different places, whereas opposed in the post world, you're kind of really just sending, you might be sending some effects sends, but most of it is your final mix bus, if you will, your main output. Whereas in the live situation, you have the transmission path to air, but you have all these other paths that are going for IFBs and for ISO feeds and various things. So I think that's probably the biggest difference in the flexibility of what the two different consoles would have to provide.
Right. I think from your description earlier, it seems like that your Calrec, the Artemis or the Apollo mixing desk for a broadcast environment is still exceedingly deep. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of processing power inside this box that maybe isn't needed for the post side of things, possibly.
Well, I would say in the post world, they definitely get a lot of inputs.
Sure.
I've seen some movie beds that have, well, I was going to say 96 tracks, but I've seen probably 150 or maybe 200 tracks that they have to try to whittle down into the different parts of the sound field. So in that sense, inputs could be similar, input capability. But like I said, I think it's more probably in the processing and the routing.
Okay.
Would be one bigger differences.
One of the things that I wanted to touch on with the three of you is the concept of the remote integration, where we're not necessarily, or at least particularly because of the pandemic and social distancing and the concept that we anticipate being that live sports will continue, but will not be in a in a venue that it has a live audience, a crowd. And with that in mind, aside from the crowd thing, but with that in mind, what sort of thoughts do you have on remote integration and creating a product, a live product, where you have the different disciplines, the director, producer, the audio guy, the video switcher, the TD, kind of not in the same room anymore. Now they're in different places, maybe even doing it from their home. What are your thoughts there?
Well, that's quite a topic of discussion. I've been on a couple of panels that have talked specifically about this. Panels with, high-end mixers and people in the industry. The new normal is going to sort of force a change to eliminate people from the stadium first. Mm-hmm. So the less people you have at the stadium, the better. If you remember the diagram of the blueprint of the truck, well, the only person in that truck that's correctly socially distanced is the audio person. He's in a room by himself.
Right.
If you look at all those chairs, those people are in very, very, very close proximity. Mm-hmm. And in a big show, a full truck is nearly impossible to, prevent, close contact. So if this becomes the normal where you do actually need some sort of separation, now you have to take out some of those people where their functions can be handled further down the chain, further down that, from where the truck content creator created it and sent it to the broadcast operations center. If you can add in the graphics downstream, you could add in the graphics downstream of the content creation. Right now, there's plenty of shows, and we're 7-8 years down this road of doing an at-home production, what we call a centralized production, where the truck is essentially the cameraman and the audio assistants. And all other functions take place at the broadcast operations center. So the TD, the director, the producer, the replay operators, and the graphics, and the audio mixer are all thousands of miles away. That's doable and has been done for many years. Some networks they've remoted all of their EVS operators. So the game is in San Francisco, and the EVS crew is in Bristol, Connecticut. Mm-hmm. That's already being done, and has been done for several years. The pandemic forced even the people at the central office. It forced them into their homes. So that is the next big mountain. How can that be done? How can it be done efficiently? How can it be done correctly? How can it be done with no one really noticing at home? Mm-hmm. The shows that I've been involved with that do a centralized production, you cannot tell on air whether I'm sitting in San Francisco or I'm on location in Oregon. There's no way for you to know.
Interesting. So, Geoffrey, you've done both live entertainment shows as well as, certainly a significant amount of post work. Do you see any sort of consequence of the social distancing happening, or can you anticipate? Do you think that it might affect the post world?
Hi, Mike. Yes, it's certainly the talk of the hour. In fact, tomorrow, I'm meeting a bunch of post engineers right here in Singapore to talk about safety measures in the post-production world. Because as you see in the pictures just now, everybody is really in close proximity. And it has been such a natural way of working. Like the directors would, be in the same room, the producers will be in the same room, and then we'll share ideas and talk about how to do this. And you do one run, and then they'll check it and says, "Oh, more of this, more of that." So it's so fluid to be all in the studios and collaborating creatively and stuff like this. And then suddenly, if you can't be in the same room, it becomes a really quite counterintuitive. So I've been a bunch of friends and stuff. We have been experimenting, how to bring this studio in different places, just like what Glenn says. How do we work in different places at the same time? When the content comes out, nobody even knows how this was done. It doesn't seem like it was remotely done. So one of the things we've been experimenting a lot is sort of like full PCM, full resolution audio in the streaming. So if we can stream to, we have different satellite studios and we can stream full resolution audio to these studios. We can hear where the master mixer is, and then we can remote control that master mixer to create the sound we want. However, it's still in a very experimental stage. We can hear the sound, but trying to remote this and trying to tweak on real time, that has been so frustrating because, for example, you have to look at a meter, like when we put compression, when we're trying to apply compression, dynamic compression to a signal or something, we need to see the compressor meter or something, and then to know whether we are overcooking it or we are second guessing it on the audio. So that's kind of tough because every time you turn the knob, you have to wait 10 seconds for it to show, and the levels are like jumping up and down. And yeah, it's still not so intuitive yet, but I'm confident that at some point technology will take over, plus our minds will change, and because of this situation, and then find a way to kind of work in between.
So, Pat, is Calrec working on or has products to facilitate this sort of remote production concept?
We do. We have the RP1 is a remote production box, but something else we've been recently offering and trying is remote control of the console. So you could actually control the Artemis or the Apollo from a distance, from actually across the country if you wanted to. The unknown at this point is, in fact, it's probably different for every scenario, is how much delay you're going to have in control. So I have the fader on the screen, I move it, the console's in New Jersey, how long does it take for that fader to actually move up? And it's not really a physical fader in a sense, you're actually controlling the DSP. So, right. But there's still delay just through the internet or however you're getting there. And then there's the problem of the monitoring. So I move that fader in New Jersey, by the time I hear it in California, you're adding another, who knows, there's varying delays. It could even be different every day. It could be a different amount. It might be 250 milliseconds one day, or it might be a full second another day. But we do have the technology at least to remote the consoles.
Well, that's great. I think it's very interesting, and we should probably get maybe into it deeper on another podcast. I think that's a good place to stop, though, guys. So thanks so much for your time. Thanks for your expertise and participating in this latest webinar. And I hope to see you guys in person at some point very soon.
Yeah, me too.
Very much so.
I'd be happy to see anybody.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah, Glenn, got to meet up with you soon too.
Thanks, Michael.
Cheers, everybody.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye.